Welcome, welcome. Welcome to Red Dress Special, a Native American Heritage Month virtual speaker series. My name is Miriam Mosqueda. I'm here as a guest on occupied Muwekma Ohlone land in San Jose, California. I work at the Indian Health Center as the job developer and coordinator for the Instilling Wellness Through Workforce Development program within Counseling Prevention Services at our Family Resource Center. For Native American Heritage Month, we're highlighting Native women and femmes in our community with weekly conversation style panels every Monday in November from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Red Dress Special is in honor of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, two-spirit loved ones to raise awareness about the disproportionate numbers of the disappearances and the lives taken that have gone unreported or underreported. Also thinking about how today our conversation is titled Multiple Frontlines, emphasizing the action that is taken in many spaces to ensure that Native voices are heard. So with regard to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, spirit loved ones, there are multiple front lines that can be stepped into to ensure justice and safety for them, for us, whether it be federal, state, county, tribal levels, calls to action through protest, overall community awareness, etc. And the speaker series is one of those spaces of awareness in honor of them. So to open up, we'll be sharing a song and dance offered by our community members.
Hi, my name is Yvonne Marshall. I am Eastern Shoshone and Shoshone Bannock. I will be offering a women's northern traditional dance in honor of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit loved ones. My red elk tooth dress was made by my cousin Jamie Okuma.
So that was our community members, two of our community members, Yvonne Marshall and Manny Lieras, with a beautiful offering. Thank you both so much for the continual ways that you show up for our community. We appreciate you both. And that song was also composed by our very own Michael Andrews, who's our supervisor here at Prevention Services. So shout out to him as well. So before we get into the conversation, a reminder for our community, please use the chat feature I will be checking that periodically throughout the session. You can use either the chat feature to send in your thoughts, affirmations, any words that kind of come up as we continue the conversation. You can also use the Q&A feature. If you have any questions throughout, you can put them into the chat as well, whatever you all feel comfortable with. We just want to make sure that you all have an opportunity to engage in this conversation as well. So like I had mentioned, this week is Multiple Frontlines with Anecita Agustinez and Teresa Castellanos to talk about their experiences, their insights, and their stories in navigating different advocacy spaces in our community and for our community at community levels, county and state levels as well. Both of them have done phenomenal work in so many different spaces. So a little bit about Anecita. Anecita Agustinez is the Tribal Policy Advisor for the Department of Water Resources. She has been actively engaged with the Department of Water Resources, various divisions assisting in tribal consultation and in the development of TWR's tribal consultation policy. She has served as the Native American Liaison and Manager of the Office of Legislative and External Affairs and the Office of Health Access at the Department of Healthcare Services. She previously was the Assistant Director in the Office of Native American Affairs at the Department of Justice in the Office of the Attorney General. Her experience includes developing and conducting training in the areas of tribal consultation, cultural competency, environmental justice, social justice issues, and legislative advocacy on behalf of California's tribal government. The Office of the Tribal Policy Advisor coordinates communication and outreach with other state agencies and facilities and facilitates government-to-government consultation between the Department of Water Resources and California's Native American tribes and tribal governments. Anecita is an enrolled citizen of the Navajo Nation. She is born to the Bitterwater clan and the Ilocano clan. And Teresa has worked with a diversity of immigrant communities for over 30 years. She began her career as a labor organizer with Justice for Janitors and the Health Workers Union. She worked for Catholic Charities' immigrant program, leading the organization's citizenship efforts in the mid-90s. And for the past 23 years, she has been a guiding force behind Santa Clara County Citizenship and Immigration Integration Program. She has also served as the president of San Jose Unified School District School Board, and has recently won her re-election for that position. So join me in welcoming Anecita and Teresa.
Thank you. So honored to be here.
Yeah, of course. So welcome. I just read your formal bios, but in your own words, please introduce yourself to us.
So Teresa Castellanos, I am blessed to live and work in the community that I grew up in. I'm blessed to raise my children in that same community, and not everyone gets that blessing. So I know what a great honor that is. I've been organizing for 30 years. I think a big part of continuing to organize is promoting culture, promoting spirituality, knowing why you do what you do. And I do think that when you look at us as a humanity, we have more in common than we have difference, because I've gotten to work with the immigrant community in a diversity of ways. But I think we also need to be acknowledged for who we are, for what our history is, for what our culture is, for what our language is. And as long as, in this weird kind of way, if you can see who we are, we get to what is universal in being human beings. But we need to be seen first. We can't be invisible. And I think we're living a historic moment right now where, as a planet, we get to heal as peoples. Not guaranteed that it's going to happen, but that we are pushing on the same direction. It's a very beautiful time to be an Indigenous person, because we get that blessing of trying to bring the healing forth after so many centuries of pain, of persecution, and of genocide. And when I see the beauty of the immigrant community, I am so honored and so blessed to be a part of it. I am Chicana, I am Yaqui, I am Tohono O'odham, and I am Cora. And I am healing myself for my current generation of children that I brought into this planet and for the future generations so that we are stronger because we know what we have survived, and we are stronger because we know what we bring to the table.
Oh, thank you, sister. Appreciate that so much. And it's an honor to even share this space with you. And Miriam, thank you so much. And I'd like to acknowledge all the organizers who put together the Red Dress Special. I'm very impressed with, the outline, the topics that you're discussing. And I just wanted to say, Yat'eh Shidene Anecita Agustinez. I'm a tribal citizen of the Navajo Nation. Korichitni Nishli'i Elkano Bashichin. So I am born to the Bitterwater clan, and I'm on my father's side. My paternal clan is Ilocano, which is Filipino. And I was born and raised in the Bakersfield area in Central California. And I did not come to the Bay Area until after college. And so I attended Stanford University in political science, and that brought me to San Jose. And I raised my family and lived in Santa Clara for over 30 years. And I created great friendships and memories there. My children still live there. Teresa, I met you and your family in the early 80s and 90s. I was also the prior chairperson of the San Jose American Indian Center in the early 90s. And that's when we had our the property there on Alameda. And we had a couple of properties at that time. A lot has changed in that community. I moved to Sacramento after my children were raised and all went to college in 2007. And that was a big change as an opportunity for me to pursue, the political science and the advocacy work that I started in San Jose and Santa Clara area. I started at the Department of Justice, and I worked under Attorney General Brown. And I also worked for 2 years under Attorney General Kamala Harris. And when she was our very first woman elected Attorney General, and I worked very, very closely with her, introducing her to tribes throughout the state of California. And then I started the job I do now at the Department of Water Resources in 2013. So I work, my job is very much an advocacy role on behalf of tribal governments that establish from throughout the state of California, and how we incorporate the water work that we do as a department. The Department of Water Resources is responsible for building some controversial and sensitive projects like the Delta Conveyance Tunnel. We manage all the dams, and many of you recall the drought that we had, and the drought was a mega drought. And droughts are never end until you get a mega flood event, which we got in Oroville in 2017. That Oroville spillway was a responsibility of my department in terms of having to rebuild that spillway and to work with the tribes that had lost cultural resources and sacred and sensitive sites because of the flooding, not only there at the dam, but throughout the watershed that affected the Feather River. And we're still recovering from the effects of that flood event, even though now the flood event then goes into fires. So these, we are in a world of climate change, and how that cycle affects the work we do as state agency representatives. And I'm very lucky that my work is to work with tribal governments and to share and elevate the tribal knowledge of traditional ecological knowledge, and how those processes can inform public policy and state policy. So that's a little bit about the work that I do, but I'm really excited to be here and to share the sacred space with sisters, and to also, return back and work with, the community from Santa Clara, which is, really something that all of you are near and dear to my heart. And I also want to acknowledge my family that reside there and work with the Indian Health Center of Santa Clara Valley. My niece Anecita Hernandez and my nephew Mehan. You're just all special to me, and I know you're doing good work, and you really are. You are frontline workers, and I appreciate that and acknowledge you for that.
Thank you both so much. Thank you. And I mean, you both already are just diving into so much of what we're going to touch on today. So thank you both for the work that you do on so many levels for our community. Anacita, you did mention that you and Teresa had met previously. Um, so do you mind maybe before we get into all of the formal questions, maybe you both can share a little bit, maybe some memories, some storytelling of how you both know each other, in what capacity, and I mean, it sounds like, I'm assuming it also centers around advocacy work as well.
Yeah. Teresa, you mentioned earlier about, in Cesar Chavez Plaza Park, the dedication of the Quetzalcoatl statue, the dedication there when the first stones were put down at, the Mexican American Heritage Center. And the first stones that were laid for the Cesar Chavez memorial there at San Jose State University. I mean, it's just like, these are things from 25 years ago, 30 years ago, and being there and hand in hand and also and sharing in ceremony. And so those are things that I recall.
And being around each other as we were raising our children, because my babies were like 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, and your babies were teenagers. And I just have the recollection of you remembering your babies had been babies and they were growing up so fast. And so that gave me the awareness of, oh, they will grow up fast, because obviously being a mother is so intense and 24/7, and it feels like it's never going to end. But it's really just a short time period that you get to be there for your children in that way. And so for someone to highlight for you that appreciation, that it is so very brief and that they do grow up and have their own lives. And I remember that without all those words, but that teaching that was passed on to me to appreciate this baby stage, it was going to be so short.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, because I do recall, going to all the community meetings, making an effort, that we make that space for mothers who have children, mothers who are nursing, and anytime you are in an environmental justice or social justice community, it's always the women who carry the water. I mean, that is from time immemorial. I mean, it will never change, because that is part of our DNA in protecting our community, fostering that sense of obligation. And I just think that is just our natural sense. And we do that through holding our children throughout all those processes. Yeah. And through all of that. And I don't know if you were at that very first time that I ever saw culture class. And I had my little babies underneath the seats with us and sitting on our laps. And I mean, it was just like there were some great things going on in San Jose at that time. And really, I mean, people pushing the envelope, especially even with the danzantes and hosting Maestro Andres Segovia and bringing that to San Jose, which was really instrumental in the concept that indigenous is beyond borders, and really melding that. And I think San Jose, the Santa Clara community, was really at that forefront of showing that, because we have been siloed even from, the tribes that are recognized versus non-federally recognized versus landless tribes. All those various labels and those boxes that people lived in, and being able to meld that together into what is indigenous, and that indigenous concept. I really think it really was foundational there in Santa Clara and San Jose.
And I would add to that in our lifetime, we've seen that transformation where people were so fragmented to people opening up to the broader community, because we are one people on this continent. And I remember in the beginning when the Stanford powwow had no Mexica anything, we didn't have anything south of the border. And of course, we still participated. And then I remember when the shift took place and we're like, whoa, this is powerful. We are recognizing that we are all natives of this whole continent, and this is amazing. And I think that's also part of the history that we haven't captured, that as indigenous communities, and I'm including Chicanos in this, we have always had that ongoing conversation and been around each other, been with each other, supported each other, and moved that agenda forward. And I think that's part of the history we need to capture, because I think that's very unique to this area in particular, that then spread to the rest of the state of California. And I remember Anecita, Arturo, my husband does a Virgen de Tepeyac play with Sacred Heart Church. He's been doing it for 25 years. And, you know, you can debate, you know, it's in the Catholic Church, colonialism, the religion of the colonists. But at the same time, a lot of us are in that space. And Anecita led the first ceremonial blessing of the first time they did that play at the church. And that play is about indigenous history, and Catholicism kind of has to move aside to recognize indigenous spirituality that is thousands of years old. It is not just limited by the Catholic Church, but it's thousands of years old, and it's in our DNA. And Anecita was there for that first blessing too. And a lot of the language that's in the play comes from that Chicano indigenous dialogue of always hanging on to who we are, despite the challenges that we face.
So thank you for remembering that, because this brings me back so far, because it was not only at that church, but as well as at St. Clair, that we actually had the priest for the Virgin's birthday celebration on December 12th utilize sage and water in a clamshell and bring in indigenous spirituality into the Catholic Church. And to recognize that, and to be able to, like you say, lead that procession at the very first was really, I mean, just a beautiful honor. And my children were part of that. And oh my goodness, that is something, and a beautiful, beautiful sacred memory. And I was there with my mother. So thank you for that.
Thank you both so much. I feel just so honored to listen to the stories and how both of your memories just like share those that perspective that each of you have from those shared memories that you both have. I was thinking of starting. I had an initial question, but you know, just hearing you both talk, something that you both touched on was motherhood, and so I think I kind of want to start there. How does how does being mothers and entering into motherhood relate to your roles as advocates? Because you both kind of touched on that, you know. So how would you say that, you know, that role as a mother has related to your work in these advocacy spaces?
Well, if you don't mind, Teresa, I'll start with this, because this is so important to me. I'm a grandmother to 5, and to many more with my extended family. And I really think that, you know, with young people, you know, not to be frustrated, because we don't, as in Western society, we don't give mothers enough time to be a mother. We don't give them time off. I mean, we're barely giving fathers time off. You know, we're not giving them that bonding time. And I know that but not for in our communities of color to have our extended nuclear family close by, that we have been able to maintain a continuity of that cultural transmission from generations. And we've defied the odds, the Western odds. I had a nuclear family where my sisters helped me raise my children, my nieces and nephews. We don't call them nieces and nephew. We call them our sons and daughters. And cousins don't call each other cousins. They certainly do, but they're also sisters and brothers. So it's this really motherhood of community that creates that. And I do think that that's a big challenge right now with this, especially in this particular urban environment. I know majority of your audience, it could be beyond Santa Clara County, but you know, you are in ground zero of the Western society, Silicon Valley, of what is going on, this TikTok world, and it is as fast paced as you can get. Because I made that transition out of San Jose in 2007 to Sacramento, and I can tell you, it's a different time clock. It's a different meter of time. that does not exist anywhere else but in Silicon Valley and Santa Clara. And so our people there, our community, you're having to fight that with every fiber of your existence, every minute of every day. My two boys still live there, and my other extended family, they live there, and they have had to learn how to survive that. And so I do have to commend the families that live there and fight that, because it is very difficult, as when you're, especially if you're starting a family. But I do want to say that I've been fortunate to be on this earth as long as I have been, and I'm starting my sixth decade of life, and I really feel like I've gone through 4 lives. After raising my children and having the opportunity to move to Sacramento and to do now almost 12, 15 years of political work, and then also to exercise other creative freedoms, to be executive producer of On Native Ground, which is a film and media company, as well as the work that I do. So there's this feeling that if you don't accomplish everything by the time you're 20 or 30, that you're judging yourself against everybody else. So I guess my reflection to young people is don't worry about the judgment of where you are if you're 20s and your 30s or even your 40s. There's a lot to be done. There's a lot of many years left. And I always tell everyone, like Teresa said, hold your children as long as you can, because there's plenty of times to do what you need to do as an adult. But that precious time of raising a child, you can never get back. And it's so quick.
Yeah. And I would add that I think that step of becoming a mother changes your whole view on life. I mean, you have a different focus, and that focus is, how do you make the world a better place for these children that you've brought into this world? And I think one of the things that I've learned through my organizing and my spiritual healing in the Native community is that we also create family as we go on. It's not just the ones you were immediately born with, but we're constantly creating family, and we're constantly adding, and it's that understanding that we're in the same place and we're all trying to survive. And I think part of the complexity of this Silicon Valley life is that we are so, I mean, just look at the rents, look at the cost of living, look at how hard it is to make ends meet. And I think before COVID, I mean, we had a lot of working class families that were working, one person working 3 jobs a day to make ends meet. And it's hard to construct community in that space, but we're still finding ways of doing it. And I think that is what we bring to the table, is that definition of family that is so strong, that will pull us through what we need to pull through. And the definition of family isn't even just our biological family, it's our community, it's our people. And I do think that the indigenous immigrants that are bringing a lot to this country, the biggest thing they're bringing is their sense of solidarity and the way that they support each other, because no one else helps them in this community. And so I think that there's a lot to be said about our definitions of family, and our expanded definitions of family. And even in that whole loss of land, the reservation, the boarding schools, as communities, we've had to learn how to expand that definition of family so that we could survive. And I think that is the beauty of what our community brings to the table.
I was thinking too, you each work in these spaces that were not created for Native folks, at the state and county levels. And so maybe just to give us a picture of what each of you do in your respective areas, what is a day at work within these advocacy spaces for you both look like?
I would say, and so when I came to Sacramento, I came definitely from a grassroots community level of working with the outside in point of view. And then when I started at the Department of Justice and the state of California, it really was very difficult. You realize that even in the technical writing aspects of just brochures and websites, Native American engagement, tribal engagement was really not even an afterthought. It wasn't even on there, and it wasn't until at the Department of Justice, I was in the Assistant Director of Office of Native American Affairs. And so Governor Brown was amazing because he began Executive Order B1011, which was really groundbreaking for California. And that's 2011, requiring consultation policies with state agencies to work with tribal engagement on our programs and projects, as well as a directive to every agency and department to develop tribal liaisons and to hire tribal liaisons to expand tribal engagement. And that's 2011. And I didn't even begin, and that's when he was governor. So when he was attorney general, tribes were upset at him. Even when he was attorney general, they felt that he was being very conservative about how he dealt with tribal relations because of, and I have to just do a disclaimer at this point. I'm speaking not as a Department of Water Resources employee or a state employee. I'm speaking to you as a tribal citizen of the Navajo Nation, as well as my personal points of view. Tribal governments were upset at him as an attorney general because what he inherited at that time, if you think about in early 2007s, we had just come from a major recession. And California, when he became attorney general, we were deeply in red. We had the first time in California history, our bond levels were almost at the sea level. I mean, we were really almost a bankrupt nation. But for, I think, the California tribal compacts that really kept the California afloat, which many citizens, in California don't even recognize. So he was very much a fiscal conservative of what his approach as an attorney general. And then, of course, he became governor. And when he became governor, he understood at that point, with his relationships that he built with the tribes, what he needed to do to have that tribal engagement. Then when he became governor, I worked closely with Kamala Harris, who was our first female. We were so excited to have a first female attorney general. And I can tell you, I was on the executive floor. My office was just literally right next door to her. And, I'd greet her every morning. But before she came into the office, there was this long hallway, about 30 feet long. And there was a picture of every attorney general in California's history, and it was tipped from day one, and it was about 20 pictures of every typical average white guy. And those of us who would go by it every day, which I did every day, we'd laugh and go, yeah, we can't wait to see her picture right there with this long slew. And so now we have, Senator Harris is now our vice president-elect. Her approach in the early days of tribal engagement, it was also, they don't have experience. It's very common that elected officials have very little tribal engagement unless they've had something cultivated, or they have great staff that has assisted them in cultivating that. I was really proud to see when she did their acceptance speech, that when she said, African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and Native Americans, she said that. And that was my big thing, is that anytime you're going to spell out any ethnic or racial classification, you include tribal nations. And I said, how difficult is it to not include them? Because you would never hear that said out loud. You wouldn't see it in writing. And that was one of the things that I was a big advocate of, especially in websites and documentation and different things. And then of course, from Attorney General, she became senator, and now we know the next phase of what she's done. At that time, then I moved to the Department of Water Resources. That was another, embedded organization that had very little tribal engagement. And a lot of it is due to just policies. When it comes to tribal water rights and how tribes engage with state agencies, many state agencies feel that tribes are protected or like they're being handled by the federal government. And that's a misnomer, because as we know, in California, we have over 109 federally recognized tribes. We have over 78 non-federally recognized tribes. And Governor Brown's Executive Order B1011, which was incorporated by Governor Newsom's executive order in 1920, that incorporated all of that, further says that every state agency works with every California Native American tribes without a distinction of their status, whether they're federally recognized or non-federally recognized. And that's a major step. But that was only incorporated in 2020 by Governor Newsom, and reincorporating Governor Brown's 2011. This is not even a decade old of policies that we're dealing with as state agencies. And then on top of that, the major legislation in California was not until 2014, when California passed the Proposition 1 Water Bond, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and the CEQA Amendment, which is the California Environmental Quality Act's amendment called AB 52, that established consultation with tribes for protection of tribal cultural resources. And that's 2014. Prior to that, when it came to state bond funding, tribes were not at the table, because the Public Water Code said that tribes were not qualified to restate funding because they're not considered a public water agency, because they're sovereign nations. So you have all these layers upon layers of problems and hurdles that have kept tribal governments out of state level advocacy. But those are some of the challenges, and we're working through them as state agencies. I do say that Governor Newsom is very proactive. Lots of hiring going on in his office with the tribal advisor and the work that's being done. Last September 25th, which is the California Native American Day, he unveiled a brand new policy, and I just have some notes on it. But the policy is called the Statement of Administration Policy of Native American Ancestral Lands, and that was unveiled on September 25th of 20. And it's a companion piece to his executive order for the first public apology that any governor has issued on behalf of the citizens of California to California tribal citizens for recognizing genocide and slavery and history of just bad the destructions of tribal communities and the dislocation of tribal communities, and that history of what tribal citizens in California have had to do. And so this new statement of administration policy has to do with ancestral lands. And that's really important for tribes that have been landless, and how then they can utilize that statement of policy dealing with natural lands that are in excess of state policy, and then how they can make claim to that or be able to protect ancestral lands for their ancestors. So those are the new policies and practices that I will have to navigate and provide recommendations and actions through my department and through Natural Resources Agency.
I'll talk a little bit of my work, which is county focused. So I work for the Office of Immigrant Relations, and I worked there for 23 years. What we do through our work is support immigrant integration. We promote Citizenship Day. We fund immigration legal services. And I think one of the things that has been highlighted in this current administration in the last 4 years is that immigration is an Indigenous issue. And when we look at who's being affected at the border, when we look at who's in the cages, when we look at who's being separated, it's Indigenous people who speak Indigenous languages. And so I think that is one of the things that we have to bring back and bring forth, because that is the community that is being the most attacked at this point. And even in the sterilizations that took place, they were Indigenous women in the South. And so I think that's part of the conversation that we need to be having as a people, is that as Indigenous people, we are being forced to migrate in the most dangerous ways, in the most non-beneficial ways, in the most ways that cause more pain and more sacrifice than many other communities. And we need to start talking about this. And I think this is not new. I don't think this is new. But in the past, we classified indigenous people as campesinos, farm workers, or we classified them as peasants, or we classified them as, Mexicans. But if we're talking about the Mexican population, a significant part of the Mexican population is also indigenous. And if we look at who's been migrating and why they're forced to migrate, it's the issue of poverty and the issue of being displaced and the issue of being landless and having to find a way to survive. And so I think that is one of the big conversations that we need to keep pushing as a community, because we're talking about indigenous people in their native continent, in their native lands, in their native space. And we're talking about not having enough services on the border, and the crisis that's being created on the border is targeting indigenous people. And the fact that we don't have enough translators. And when you look at indigeneity in the state of California, I think in 2010 maybe, or 2000, I can't remember if it was 2000 or 2010, was the first time that as a state, we started counting Mexican indigenous people. And then we became the most numerous indigenous state. Out of the whole 50, we became bigger than Oklahoma because we finally started counting the complete size of the indigenous community here, not just the people who were, native to North America, but that we're all in the same space. And I think one of the beautiful things that Mexica movement has created, I think, in our state has been an identification of Mexican communities and Chicano communities, and that reminder that we are indigenous people. Part of the fragmentation, part of the loss of culture, the loss of language is to take away your identity and who you are. And I think you need your identity, you need to know who you are to make claims. And so that's why this is so important in this discussion of how indigenous communities continue to face that loss and continue to be robbed of language and culture, and the ways that we are finding to survive and continue to survive despite the practices that continue to evolve and develop in different ways. Because yes, we had boarding schools before where we were separating children from their parents, and now we're separating at the border from their parents. And that was so evil that the parents were given one number, the child was given another number, so that you could never reunify that family unit again. And so that someone purposely thought about that and to carry it out to deter migration on this continent. And there's an evilness there that's like really old, that's been around for a really long time, and that people have been thinking about how would we implement something like this to deter people from migrating. And our communities continue to suffer similar things that they've been suffering for over 500 years. And so that's the conversation we need to be having right now about what started 300 years ago, 500 years ago, what continues now, how is it manifesting now, how do we point it out, how do I identify it? I think what this pandemic has offered us is this idea of being able to look at what is that injustice, what is that legacy that we continue to carry that we need to change. And I think the opportunity with the movement that started with the Black Lives Matter movement is that it's something that spreads to everybody else, to claim that space, to stand in solidarity, to come forth and say, hey, we need those statues teared down too. We have several here in San Jose that we need to get rid of. And to move that conversation of we should not be promoting white supremacy in every realm of our lives. And this is how it impacts children. I think one of the things that I've been able to do as a school board member was that we renamed Peter Burnett Middle School, and he was the first governor of California that started genocide in the state of California. We renamed it Moek Maloney. And there was a debate because the Chicano community wanted to also rename it Esther Medina, which is a perfectly great name. But I think as a board and as a community, we decided, hey, we need to start where the pain started first. And it was by recognizing who the original peoples are here in this area. And just that beautiful moment of starting that healing process by renaming a school. And so that's that kind of ripple work that we need to keep doing in our communities so that our young people know their history, so our young people know their values, so our young people know the contributions of their people.
It seems to, just thinking about you know, what you both are sharing, it's like an interwoven theme of all of this, of, you know, Indigenous folks really um, just wanting humanity and it being denied by these different spaces in which you both are, you know. Even, you know, what you were sharing, Anecita, that it wasn't until like 2011, 2014, 2020 where these policies, you know, started coming forward, even, you know, acknowledging Indigenous folks in your realm of work. And then, you know, Teresa, just making this connection also between like this colonial violence, right, of a separation of families, of language, of culture, all of these different things. And something that you had said, Teresa, with regards to the renaming of the school, was recognize where the pain started first. And so thinking about that, and then also in connection to your own, both of your personal relationships to advocacy work, um, do you each have maybe an earlier memory in connection to the advocacy work that you all can think of for yourselves that led essentially to this ongoing work that you all have been doing?
I could start. I would say that for me, I'm the oldest daughter. So that means I had a lot of siblings to take care of. And so I was in charge of being at home when my parents were at work. And I remember one day, my father was a tailor, and he would hire undocumented workers as part of his business. And immigration came to our house. And I remember I must have been 12, 13, 14, and I answered the door, and there's an officer at my door, and he's saying, well, I need to search the house. And all I could think of at that point was like, I will get in trouble if I let this man into my house. And I said, no, that he could not come into my house and that he could not search my house. So I would say that was the first time that I stood up to something. He ended up searching the house anyway, because I was just a child and he didn't listen to me. He went around the back of the house and did a search. But I would say the thing that transformed my thinking was that there was a frozen food strike in Watsonville when I was a student at UC Santa Cruz. And my mother was a cannery worker. And so when that frozen food strike happened, a bunch of us Chicanos went to support in solidarity in that frozen food strike. And we get arrested because they had painted a red line, and you couldn't cross that red line if you were in support of the strikers. And of course we crossed the line, and we're young, and we end up getting arrested, but we end up getting involved in the strike. We end up teaching English classes. We end up going to the protests and organizing and mobilizing. And for me, what it triggered in me, and before that, I had always been challenged in school because I didn't learn how to read until 5th grade. I was a English-speaking child, and I was a Spanish-speaking child in an English-only world. And so I spent a lot of years in school where I'm just daydreaming because I don't know what's happening. I finally learned to read in 5th grade. And so, but even though I learned to 5th grade and it transformed my school reality, I still was not an owner of my education. When that strike happened, I realized that my education had a purpose. It wasn't just a reflection of me or my inadequacies or what I couldn't do. It was a tool for what I wanted to do. And so for me, being involved in that strike was very transformational because I saw the power of immigrant communities. I saw mothers, because it was mainly a women's led movement. They were on strike. I saw mothers stand up for themselves and stand up for their children. I saw mothers be on strike for 2 years and saw how hard that was. And I saw the leadership and the sacrifice that they were willing to carry out to stand up against working conditions that wanted to cut their salaries by $3-4 an hour. And they knew they were not going to be able to make ends meet if that took place. So I saw the strength of our community in that strike. And I think that transformed me, number one, into realizing we have a power as a community, that when we organize, we can change things. And number two, that there was a purpose to my education. So I was no longer a victim of it, but there was a reason to go through what I was going through. So it was relevant.
Mine is similar to yours, Teresa. I really attribute a spark of activism to my father. And my father is Filipino. And my father was born in 1903. And he did not get a family until the late 50s because Filipinos were, subject to anti-miscegenation laws, and they weren't allowed to have female Filipinas immigrate. And he was there, and of course, you could not marry outside of your race if you were a Filipino. And knowing his story, and then how he found my mother. My mother, was about 35 years younger than my father, and seeing how my father was treated, and knowing his story of how he immigrated to California, via the pineapple plantations from Philippine Islands to the Hawaiian Islands, and then to California. He was part of those early Watsonville riots in the late 20s in California. And his stories of all of those stories, because he came and immigrated about 1927 during the height of depression. I mean, this is his story, and this is my father. And then he was a farm labor contractor in Central California, in Biola and Delano and Arvin and Bakersfield. And by then I was about 11 years old, and I was working, and there was how he was treated as a Filipino farm labor contractor. And growing up in the Central Valley, it was really a brown and white town, and they, irregardless that I was biracial and Filipino and Navajo, we were considered, you were the brown families, and you were the working class families, and everybody else, if you were white, you were the owners of the landlords. And it's just such a feudal system. And I just could not believe, in the 70s that was how we were living, in this feudal system of contracted farm labor housing, contracted labor, and all of that. And so that made me realize, and my father says that, this is the life unless you have an education. And then also the advocacy in terms of what they had to do to be able to get a break, to get water, to be able to get portable toilets for the workers, and the workers that he was in charge of and responsible for. I mean, these were just basic human needs. And and learning that. And people say, oh, you work so hard. And I said, no, hard work is what I did in my teen years, working with my father, toiling under the farm labor conditions. And I look at all the work that I do now as a tribute to that hard work, and it's work that I love, and I'm happy to do it. But I don't think there's anything that's harder than that. And then to see your generation before you, because of lack of education or lack of access, to anything, that, and to see that suffering, and to see how hard my father worked. And I think that really fired that political spark. And then, of course, my job as an 11-year-old was to stamp every box, every lug of grapes that with the union label before it got put on a gondola and sent away. And if it didn't have that, then nobody would be paid. And that was like, you had to do this. And that was my very first, contract labor I've ever done. And I think I was 11 years old. And I think my mother actually sent us out there to make sure that we were able to take care of our father and make sure he was, because at that point, you can imagine in 1976, my father was 73 years old, still doing that kind of work, and working at that age in that kind of, conditions that we still see today. And it's not any different today. And when I drive home to Bakersfield, or I drive through, Salinas Valley, I'm just reminded, like, what has changed? I mean, what has changed for that laboring class? And we debate in our on the steps in Congress for a minimum wage, and we cannot give a minimum wage to anyone. I mean, it's just like the atrocities that we have to do, and we're talking 30 years. This is decades, in terms of what is a human right. Human right to life, human right to water, and in terms of just what that means on these front lines of advocacy for our communities and what our communities have to deal with.
This population in particular, and I'm talking about farm workers, has been classified as essential workers without respect, without dignity, without the right to healthcare access. Just take care of us because that's what we need, but we're not going to give you anything in return, even after we recognize that you're essential workers. There is a lot of work to be done, especially in the protection of farm workers. And I would also just let you know that Watsonville did an apology last week for the Filipino riots in Watsonville last week.
Really?
Yeah, the city council did it.
Wow.
And I'm like, they call it Filipino riots when they were attacking the Filipinos. But yeah, they did an apology. The city did last week. I think I posted
the letter strikes. My father talked a lot about those letter strikes, and then the death of the brother. Then they had to make a collection to send his body back to the Philippines.
And that's who kicked off the UFW organizing too, was the Filipino workers who went on strike first, and the Mexicans decided to go out in solidarity.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was the birth of the UFW.
Yeah, we lived a time in Delano in early March, and so I recall those meetings.
So beautiful to hear you both reflect on these things. And again, like there's like this common theme of like just fighting for humanity, you know, in so many different spaces. And you know, even just your reflection, Anecita, that not much has changed, right? And again, connecting to what you said earlier, like it's taken up until 2020 for you know, for the governor to have issued that apology, you know, and so it's like these small steps, but also so much more work to go. And yeah, so thank you both for sharing that.
But small steps with constant organizing. As communities, we don't pause. As communities, we keep going. And it takes a lot to gain things, but it's this constant pushing over and over again until we get things to change. And unfortunately, I think what we realized in the last 4 years, is that things that we thought we had gained, we realize, oh, you didn't gain them. There's been this resistance to them the whole time. And we backtracked in things that we thought we had resolved.
And you're going to find that in the environmental and social justice communities, that it is on the backs of these very women that have made that transition from farm labor to maybe some domestic labor, that now are fighting for clean water, clean air, having safe water come out of their taps in these communities. And we're seeing that as what's going on.
I did want to circle back to something that you shared, Anecita, when you were initially giving your introduction. You said that it's always the women who carry the water. And I heard that, and I was just thinking about how that relates to the work that you are currently doing, you know, within your role. Yeah, how do those two things relate for you?
Well, I think it really is. When you look at the demographics of social justice, environmental justice communities, I mean, yes, we need all allies, and you never can be totally a gender specific, organizing committee. You've got to have, every demographic, male, female, children, all of that. But typically, and invariably, if you were going to go and look at demographics, it is women. It is women that are working during the day saying, enough is enough. My children are asthmatic. Why can't I have, clean air? What is going on here? My children have sores. There's unclean water. And they're the ones that are saying, because of what we started about earlier about motherhood, you have this this undeniable, feeling of protection of what you have to do for your children. And if it means working 20 hours a day and then having to either be on the phone or going to a meeting with those children in tow, not sleeping, those are the people that have been moving the needle every time on this compass that we call, this advocacy, and it has been the women. We see that not only in our communities, we see this in the African American communities. And you look at what propelled Black Lives Matter. You look at it, what propelled the advocates there at Standing Rock. In all of these areas, it has been the women that have been doing this, and it's just frontline. And I think it always will be that. And then I think because we are now going to see what women leadership can do with our vice president elect, and that balance of that male-female dynamic. Because I mean, obviously, as a woman, I'm very conscious about just how strong it is for women who carry the water. But you can't do it alone. You have to have that male-female dynamic in anything we do, and honor that. And honor that dynamic. So I'm looking forward to how that works. And then, we can't do frontline work with our male advocates, and there has to be that protection. There has to be, that co-parenting that's needed. But but that's something that, I really feel. I see it in the metaphorical and spiritual, and in just the literal sense. Have experienced it and witnessed it.
And I would add, when you're talking about the immigration experience and immigrant women, because immigrant women have to deal with school, have to deal with taking the kids to the doctor, have to deal with the kids when they get in trouble, immigrant women become more quickly integrated into U.S. society than immigrant men do. And we see that especially among Mexicanas, where Mexicanas are becoming U.S. citizens at a faster rate, and Mexicanas are deciding to run for office at a faster rate than the Mexican men. And I remember we were doing a focus group once in Gilroy at a center that worked mainly with women, and we're getting ready for the focus group, and the women were talking among each other that their husbands didn't want them to go out, and their husbands didn't want them to drive the car, and their husbands didn't want them to ask for free food, because they were afraid that people would find out that they were undocumented. And the women were kind of laughing among each other that they're never going to find out if I'm undocumented if I don't say anything. How would they know just by looking at me? But you could see that, and the men were working 2 and 3 jobs a day. So obviously they were not integrating into society because all they were doing was working. And to just see that shift in the empowerment of the women, because they have to deal with the issues of the children, and how that makes you stronger and how that pushes you forward. And obviously it's not about doing it alone, but it's about realizing the power that women have when they have children to raise. Because the power of a mom, you're like, wow, what a mom can do. Even when I was a mom of young children, I was surprised at the things that I could get done, that if it was just being by myself, I'm like, okay, I don't feel like doing it. But when you're responsible for someone else, you push yourself to the limit. And you can see a mom holding 2 to 3 babies, and you're like, whoa, she's super strong because she can carry that many kids.
Yeah, there's a lot of power.
Yeah.
And you both had also kind of talked about throughout all of your sharing in this session, giving shout outs and, connecting all of these other movements that are going on too, like whether it's Black Lives Matter or, work with farm workers and et cetera. And so, thinking about today's topic being multiple front lines, right? And knowing that each of you are on a particular front line as well, how do you each see the connection between your work and also folks that are on other front lines, whether it's protest work, folks that are organizing in different spaces, art, etc. How do you all see the connection between all of these front lines?
I don't know that I see it. It just happens, and I do think that that's the beauty of it all. I mean, we don't realize how connected we are, and it's almost an esoteric and organic process in itself. And I do think that if somebody, if your goal was, I'm going to be all of these things at one time, you're not going to be anything.
Yeah.
I think that the best approach is, what can you do in your sphere? What is your sphere of influence? And if the best thing you can do is to raise a healthy, beautiful, mindful child that is going to be awakened and a productive individual and adult, you've accomplished everything in life. everything else is going to fall into place. I think that, and I've witnessed families that, they've had activist moms and dads, but then they've lost a generation. Somebody has had to pay for that time. And I do think that that's the most important, precious thing, is not to lose your own children, no matter what you do, and finding that balance. And it's okay. Raise that child, because there's a lot of living to be done. And there's a lot of opportunities to reset a timeline. And the thing is that whose timeline is it anyway? And not to look at the outside judgment, because our destinies are what we make. And I do, and I tell this to all the children, my children, the children that come to me, and the young people that I mentor, is not to worry about the judgment that comes down on you. Your choices are your choices, and control your sphere of what you do, and be happy with that, and be happy with those choices. And I guess really what that means is be authentic to what you believe in. And if you can do that, then you're going to find all these other opportunities, and all these other opportunities start interlocking, because then you are in the right step, and you're in that right space, and your heart is open. And other people will then, if you have that will and that desire, other people are going to give you that empowerment through their love and through their support. And you're just going to find an expansion of, wow, this is even better than what I could even imagine for myself. And I'm basically telling you how I've experienced things. And it wasn't for, and I call them my mujeres, in San Jose, Santa Clara, women that mentored me, and they taught me that. And they also taught me an important thing in my early 40s, is learning to say no as well, because we want to say yes to everything. And it's okay to say no, and it's okay to step back, and it's okay to pause, because you're nothing if you don't have your sanity. And so that's also important. And we have that hard choice of, like, what is the balance? How do you find that balance? But if you know that it's out there, and you keep that in your mind sphere, then you're going to be able to say, okay, am I teetering, or am I not? Do I need the support of my circle? And then find your circle that's there to help you, and to give you that strength when you need it. And don't be afraid to ask for that kind of help. The community is there. And that's another thing. You learn to say no, but also learn to ask for help. And it's, your community is there.
A lot of stuff, what would I say? I would say that a lot of the stuff that comes from other communities is obviously a reflection of their life. And Black Lives Matter, we all deal with the issue of police and police brutality. And so it's easy to step into that solidarity, because we see other people of color being murdered by police. And so it's easy to say, okay, that is something I support. The same thing with housing issues. We're all working people. The housing crisis is huge, especially here in Silicon Valley, and it's going to get worse as the pandemic and the economic crisis comes. And so that's another space where you step in, not because you're thinking, well, they're this and we're that, but hey, we're all facing this, and we all need to stand together. And I think that is the beauty of the moment that we're seeing, is that there is this really big social movement. And I think young people supporting Black Lives Matter, of course it's about George Floyd, of course it's about Black Lives Matter, but I think it's also about what we're not giving our young people, and how our young people will have less than what their parents had, and how they're outraged and pissed that this is a situation that they're in. And so I think the things that we step in, and sometimes they may seem a lot, but they're an extension of what we're already living too. And they're the issues that are already impact us too, because they don't just impact a little piece of the community, they impact all working families, they impact all people of color. And so I think finding that space to stand in solidarity is not that difficult. It's deciding to stand in solidarity. And I'm at the age where I don't go to everything, but I do go to the things that I think are important. And occasionally it's with the Muslim community, occasionally it's with the Black Lives Matter, occasionally it's in the homeless issue. And I try to pace myself, because I mean, one of the things of not learning how to pace yourself is you also deal with a lot of chronic illness as you age. And that's one of the sacrifices that we also make, is our health. And when you're so connected to a social movement that you don't remember that, oh yeah, I have to rest, oh yeah, I have to step out. And I think it's really important that we redefine leadership in such a way where I can trust Anecita, I can trust Miriam, and I know they will represent my community. I don't have to be physically present all the time. And leadership means that I can step back and I can step forward and I can take a break and I can have a life. And we don't need a Messiah leadership, because a Messiah leadership takes a really long time to produce, like at least 100 years or 150 years. And then that person is there for a little while and they get to do a lot. But then something happens to them and then we're waiting another 150 years. And so the beauty of what I see in the current social movements is everyone saying, hey, we're doing this together. There isn't just one person leading it. And there could be a lot of critique about it, about, oh, there isn't any one leader. But I see people moving forward in a safer way, because you're taking turns, you're trusting, you're building, and you're redefining leadership in this different way. Because I think we're all leaders. The moment we become parents, you realize how much of a leader you really are, because you're taking charge of somebody else's life. But I think it's all in our nature. Some people are given an opportunity to do it outside of their homes. And I think part of this larger discussion has to be, how do we take turns with each other so we don't have to sacrifice so much, including our health and sometimes our relationships?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about what you mentioned, Teresa, about how everybody is a leader. This is a unique time for our young people, because you are seeing people that look like us in leadership, in academics, in politics, in other social justice circles. There was a time, say 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, you wouldn't see people of color employed in these positions. My position didn't even exist until 2013 to have that role. It didn't even exist. They didn't even think that there could be a need for a full-time policy advisor on tribal affairs in the state of California, which is the largest population of Native Americans in the entire country. And it's like, oh, okay, well, let's think about how to do that. So for our young people right now, it's an incredible time. And there was a question in the chat about how to choose your mentors. And I think that is very important, because I have been subject to and had the benefit of mentors, many mentors from many aspects. And so you think about, and it's okay to have more than one mentor, a mentor that you want to have as a spiritual mentor, or a mentor that is on a track of a professional track, and decide, is this the professional track that I want, and then seek out the women or men. And I've had mentors as well as female mentors, so it does not matter. It's the individual and that connection that you have on a mentors. But I do think that sometimes it works out. You just fall, or you meet into somebody, you just meet them, and you're like, you just make this connection. If that's not available to you, is to look at different types of organizations and groups, and ask. I have had so many cold calls, so to speak, I don't know the better word for it, where individuals said, your name came up, and I'm seeking advice on this. And I answer those calls, or I meet with these individuals, or we'll have a Zoom call. And I'm always open to doing that. And I think that don't be afraid to ask. Even it's a CEO of a company, ask them. They surprisingly are in a position that they want to give back, and they will give back their time. I mean, you'd be surprised at how many individuals and CEOs I answer every email that comes to my way when it comes from a young person asking and seeking advice. Even political officers, if that's an area that you want to do, they will answer those calls. So it's a matter of kind of winnowing out what type of mentorship you need, and figuring out if it's what advice or mentorship. I also think organizations where that you have a passion, you'll also meet people that share in those political values, if that's important to you, as well as another way to find mentors.
Thank you. Yes, tying that into also another question in the chat that came up was how do you begin the organizing process?
I think it starts with finding people who have similar ideas or similar struggles or similar organizations. Um, I think the Indian Health Center offers a lot of opportunities for healing, for health, for organizing. There's a lot of community-based agencies that are doing the work. Sacred Heart is doing a lot of organizing. Somos Mayfair is doing a lot of organizing. Even Parents Helping Parents is doing a lot of organizing, and that's a project around special ed and organizing parents to help them advocate for their children. There's a lot of opportunity right now because there's a lot of need. And then sometimes it's just gathering with a bunch of girlfriends and deciding, hey, we're going to change the world and we're going to start by doing it this way. The Black Lives Matter started that way. 3 women were together and they said, shit, and another person gets killed, Black Lives Matter. And so it started this big old movement that is now incredible in its attraction of the youth movement and the changes that need to take place. So I think just getting involved in your community and you'll find ways to participate and ways to organize. And sometimes you're ready to try something and sometimes you're not ready to try something. And it's a little bit like the mentorship. If you connect to somebody and say, hey, I want to get involved, I like what you do, I want to get involved. A lot of times people will say, hey, we're always looking for volunteers. We're always looking for people to get involved and get engaged. And I think it's about giving back to our community, but it's also about our safety as individuals, belonging to something bigger than just us. Because I think part of the survival in this nation is like, okay, I go to work and I go home. I go to work and I go home. But we're never going to change things if we don't get involved in our communities. And we need to say, hey, this is not working. Why should I have to work 3 jobs? Why should I be 20 something and I know that I'm never going to be able to live in the community that I grew up in because I can't afford the housing here? As elders, we should be able to say, hey, my grandkids are not going to grow up around me because my kids can't afford to live here. And they're all college educated and that's not going to help. Or why should someone have to work 3 jobs to make ends meet? So there's a lot to get involved with.
I'm just underlining that with a bold marker, everything you said, Teresa.
All of that times 2.
Mm-hmm.
So the second part of the question about the mentors was, well, what wisdom do you have for young teens and how to choose their mentors wisely? And then the second part, and maintain their wellness as they lead with their life purpose.
I would say that as someone who was not great at taking care of herself, because I have chronic illness, in my struggles, my kids have seen my struggles and I see my kids healing things that I was not able to heal, and I follow their lead. And so it doesn't always just go in one direction. The olders don't always know everything. I think we know a lot because we've been around for a long time, but doesn't mean we know everything. And I think young people bring to the table, hey, there's new ways of doing things. There's new ways. And sometimes we, as elders, we talk about things without realizing what we're talking about and what we're complaining about. And young people are listening. And so they find ways of, hey, you can address this in a different way. Hey, this is a good thing that helps. Hey, that, and I, because I also work with the May Day marches that we do. And I remember the first time, and one of my daughters was leading the organizing around that. And she introduced she, her, and hers, the pronouns. And to see all the elders struggling with, okay, I got to remember to do this. But that was a good thing to learn. That was, and to understand why you were learning to do that and why that was important to do that. You see the intergenerational organizing, and you see that learning goes in 2 different directions.
And I think that's a really strong evolution of thought process that is new right now And thank you for mentioning that, because I learn all the time from my young nieces and nephews and my children. I mean, they open my eyes to so many different things. But wellness is very difficult, and it is. I think you have to prioritize that. What is your goal? Our goal is to make things a better place, for our loved ones and our lives. But to do it in the most practical and efficient manner, is it wellness? And not to lose sight that that is part of that, the ingredients to that ultimate, the process that you want, is not to lose sight of that. And that is a challenge. I mean, it'll be a challenge throughout your lifetime, and that's okay, because that means that you are still learning not to take things for status quo, that you're still learning and evolving. And then it also means that you're subject to evolving in a very positive way.
And I would add that wellness is also coming together in community. And just for the pure joy of the drum and the dance and of who we are, and seeing the babies know more than we know. And it's just so incredibly beautiful and empowering to come together in community, to just be in the joy of who we are.
Thank you both. And that is a perfect segue into the last question. What advice or loving words would you all like to share with our youth, in addition to all of the wonderful things that you all have already shared?
I would say my advice is to remember that you matter. And for us as a community, you are the most important thing we have. And sometimes the struggle is so huge that we forget to express that. But know that a lot of what we're doing is to try to prepare for the future and make a stronger future. And sometimes we get sucked up into do it all and we forget to actually take care of the present. And I remember I was once at a community forum on the housing crisis, and this was like 4 years ago, before we even hit it big time. But there was this little Vietnamese girl, and she was talking about how she had been collecting garbage recyclables with her mom since she was in middle school, and how she did it all through high school, and how she didn't get to do a lot of high school things because she was always working with her mom, because her parents got separated and the dad couldn't sustain two homes, and he was living at work and he was trying to help them sustain. So they had to do things to help their family. And I remember her words were like, "You guys like to talk about us as if we're the future." And she said, "But we are the present and we are suffering. And this is the life that you're giving us." And so that just got stuck in there, that we so sometimes focus so much on the future that we forget what's happening in the present. The other thing I would add to our young people is that I've been waiting for your leadership, and I am so excited about your leadership, and I will follow you wherever you take us, because we have been waiting for you for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's great, Teresa. And I would add to that is to know your truth, because your truth is you. And even if you feel that it's broken and you feel broken, it's still your truth. And there's a value to that is 100%. And it's 100% authentic. And so, and if you can find that truth, and if you feel that you're not, fully there, then you know what you can build upon. You're never that broken that you cannot be loved, and that you are part of a larger community. Your roots are there, your roots are strong, and we are, we are a resilient, and our communities, we represent all our ancestors that have come before us, who fought every inch of their life and breath to be who we are now. And we're doing that same right now with everything that we do for our future generations. And I think if we put ourselves into that circle of truth, I think that's where we can find that inherent power to continue on and to help guide us with those tough decisions. Then there's always tough decisions. It doesn't matter what your age is. There's always going to be a tough decision, and something that says, wow, here's another mile marker. What do I do now? But if you, and sometimes you're alone in that process, irregardless of how big your family is, irregardless of how popular or your social circle, it's still ultimately you. And I think that if you can build your truth and build that, then you've got the power to really stay in that path of wellness and healthiness, and learn to reach out. And it's there. But that's, I think that would be my parting words, and I just think that's something I would share, and something that I was told and taught at a young age
And
by
I would
women
just
wiser than me. Mm-hmm.
and I would just add that the beauty of what we're living is that we get to grow till the day we die. As long as we choose to do that, we get to keep growing. And there isn't a time period where, damn, I didn't get it right, it's messed up forever. That you get to change, you get to grow, you get to try something new. And I think that's the beauty of being a human being, is that if that is what we decide, we get to grow till the day we die, and we get to heal too. So that is the beauty of the time we're living. That is the beauty of the organizing that's taking place. That is the beauty of the power of our community.
Thank you both. Thank you. So we are nearing the end of our time. I would like to ask all of the folks that are here, joining us in the conversation, if you could maybe put in a few words of affirmation, show some love to Anacita and Teresa for joining us today. Really quick, it does look like we did get a last minute question. So maybe if you both are open to answering this before we log off. How would you explain social justice to elementary school age children in a homogeneous population, specifically rural reservation schools?
I would say it's fighting for what's fair for our community and for our needs and for fixing things that don't work well.
Yeah, that is a challenge, and I agree with Teresa. That would be a good start, and I do think that examples are needed for young children to feel a loss, and if they could feel a loss, and I know that I've seen this done with my children. You would take the children and give them different colored T-shirts, and all of a sudden, they're the red group for that day, and the green group for the next day, and certain groups would have certain privileges, and they're like, wow, I don't get milk, I don't get a second cookie, and say this is how the real world lives, and that these are things that they could understand within their context. So depending on how elementary the students are, of sharing that without getting them to the point of where they want a major pushback. But there's some really good examples out there in the academic world of those experiments, social experiments to say. But I do think that what Teresa mentioned is just sharing that knowledge that it's about fairness, and there's a certain innate intuitiveness of what is fair in any individual, no matter how old you are. It's always there, and you see it in newborns when they're trying to cover the next newborn next to them with, not newborns but children. I've seen it with my nieces and nephews. If they've like got a blanket, they're going to share that blanket. I mean, there's always that sense of sharing that's society takes out of our children, and that is how they come into this world. They come into this world as pure human beings, and so we want to get back to where they are and how they've come into this world with that purity and that sense of that innate sense of what is right in the world.
And I would add that our children know. If they're asking, they see and they know. And so I've always tried to speak with the truth. Obviously, it's age appropriate for what I think is age appropriate, but always speak with the truth, because the kids can see, the kids can feel, the kids know when there is stress in their family. They know their parents better than anybody else.
Thank you both for answering the question. We do have some affirmations in the chat. Thank you, Anacita and Teresa. Such a beautiful conversation. Thank you, Anacita and Teresa, for your wisdom and your hearts, for sharing your wisdom and your hearts with us. Thank you for really powerful observations and history sharing. I'm excited for the energy of women to carry this community and nation forward. Whatever it is we can do, we should do it now. Thank you, Miriam, Anecita, and Teresa, for your wonderful conversations with us. Yes, the truth is powerful. Um, Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Anecita and Teresa. This was inspiring. Oh, well, thank you both so much. A million thank yous for, for this, for just sharing space with us and, just your loving words, your memories, your storytelling, everything that you all bring forward for our communities. Thank you so, so much. Thank you also for everyone who joined us here tonight. So next week is our fourth week of Red Dress Special, and we're going to be having Native Creatives where we will be joined with by Kalina Lawrence and Whitney Lewis to talk about how they merge culture and creativity in their respective spaces. So be sure to join us next week. Share with your folks the RSVP so they can come and join the live Zoom webinar. And yeah, thank you all again. Thank you, Teresa and Anecita, once again for your time with us. And that concludes our third session of Red Dress Special Multiple Front Lines. Thank you all so much for joining.